I'm Brian D. Johnson. This is Jake Yanowski. I'm the producer and director of Al Purdy Was Here, which is a feature documentary about a great Canadian poet.
How did it come to be?
Why don't you interview me?
Okay. Let me ask you, Brian. So, Brian, why don't you tell us the story of
how it came to be?
Yeah.
I've been a journalist and a film critic of Maclean's for 28 years, and shortly before I left, my wife brought Al Purdy into our home. He's been dead for 15 years, so it's not like that, but she's a writer, an author, and she's the co-writer of our film, and she was writing a play about Al Purdy, and she got caught up in a campaign to save his A-frame cabin in Prince Edward County. She ended up scripting a show at Kerner Hall to raise funds to restore Al's landmark A-frame cabin. And she asked me to cut a montage, which is a hobby of mine, cutting montages, with archival footage, and that's how I got pulled in. And then I ended up, well, I asked them if they had shot this particular, they're going to shoot this show, and they weren't shooting the show, so we shot the show. We had footage, and that's the really long, non-TV clip-like version of how I became involved with Al Purdy Was Here. And Ron Mann, who runs Films We Like, pitched him the idea in a 5-minute phone call. He said, I'll executive produce it, I'll distribute it, we'll find a broadcaster. Time went on, all of that happened. CBC Doc Channel, fabulous, Bruce Cowley said okay, and was with us all the way. He made it happen. And the other guy who made it happen is standing next to me. His name's Jake Yanowski. He was in the trenches, and that's literal, not metaphoric, on Altman, which is Ron Mann's amazing documentary about Robert Altman. And Jake Yanowski, well, you were the
co-producer of the film, and
co-producer, not of Altman.
Not of Altman, no, sorry, not of Altman, I wish. No, I was in the trenches with Ron Mann as his post-production coordinator and head researcher for his film. And after I was done with that experience, Ron said, I'm executive producing a film, Al Purdy Was Here, and you're getting on board with Brian, and you're going to produce it with him. And it was the ride of a lifetime. It was an absolute thrill.
That's not exactly how it happened. I thought he was going to be my assistant.
Oh.
You know, I thought he was going to be, well, he was originally the assistant producer, and in no time flat, he was the co-producer. You know, I'm going to be working for Jake like if I'm still working, you know, in the remainder of my life before we're through, I think. He was amazing. He did a great job. I mean, you know, as a writer who has spent his entire life creating his own little oeuvre, however, you know, small it might be in column inches or big in a book, it's amazing to do a film where all of a sudden you're working with these other people, and it's almost like they choose you, like the right people come to you. They gravitate towards the project. Jake was one of them. You know, Nick DePonsier, our DOP, who did Watermark, was one of them. The drone operators came to us. We got the great aerial shots. I don't know where they came from. I met them in the park. You know, and we put out the call to people like a lot of musicians and writers to do stuff inspired by Al Purdy, and they include Leonard Cohen, who does an amazing reading, Bruce Coburn, who did a 6-minute epic song, the first song he's written in 2.5 years, Margaret Atwood, Michael Ondaatje, Sarah Harmer. So I ended up, you know, we started making this tiny little movie, and then all of these stars came on board, so we have a movie about a dead poet full of stars. I learned that Al Purdy had a secret life, at least one he didn't divulge in his 2 memoirs, that was significant, which I'm not going to talk about because it's kind of even though it's on the record, it's a secret hiding in plain sight, so it's a bit of a third act kind of reveal. And I learned, I think one of the things the film tells you is that you have to embrace your failures as fully as your success. And that's, Al Purdy failed for 20 years at being a poet, and there's not a single poem he wants to keep, and he wrote like volumes. And then he finally found his voice. And I think what I learned is that the important thing about being an artist, you don't have to know what is forcing you, compelling you to do it, whether you're writing a poem or making a film. But you follow that ball of twine until it takes you somewhere, and you've got to persist. You know, like you the amount of perseverance required to do anything significant artistically is huge, and there are sacrifices along the way. I wouldn't want to make the sacrifices he made. Hopefully we've evolved from there.
In addition to that, I think for me as a young filmmaker in Canada, starting out in my career, learning that there was a time in the 1960s, the 1970s, where writers and artists would get together and congregate and work together and collaborate, and they were really proud of being Canadian artists and really excited to have this moment where they had literature and original artwork that was their own. And as a young producer, I thought, this is what I want. I want this collaboration between young artists again. I mean, Al Purdy at his A-frame cabin, he invited all the young writers to his house to spend time with them. And I remember turning to Brian at one point and saying, where's my A-frame? I want an A-frame of young writers and filmmakers together. I really believe in telling original stories from the place that you are from, not trying to tell stories that could be told anywhere else, but actually supporting projects. And I do find a lot of my colleagues my age are very interested in that as well too, saying this is what we're about, this is what we want to say. I have a few things in development. I'm working with a few different filmmakers, hopefully another feature-length film, and hopefully again with this guy at one point too, because we had a great time.
I mean, what Jake said about collaboration and a place where everybody congregates, that was the subject of Sarah Harmer's song, which is titled Just Get Here. You know, and she didn't know Al Purdy very well, but she loved the idea of his A-frame, where all these artists, you talk about, you know, our internationally famous artists, well, they were once poets, not novelists. And they were excited about, you know, a movement, a cultural movement that involved musicians, writers, all kinds of people. And I think for people of Jake's generation, well, for my generation, there's a nostalgia for that cauldron, which was, you know, the 60s, 70s, where all that happened all over the world. And in Canada, that was about discovering and inventing a country and a culture. And my generation is like sad, even as Purdy was sad, and towards the end of his life saying, you know, the arts are the soul of a country. And if you sell that soul out for some kind of political deal, well, you're losing your country. It's funny, when we show that clip now, he, you know, name no names, he could be talking about the present government, the present culture, where the arts are just continually, you know, cut and fenced in. And back in his day, they were blasting out new horizons, and he busted into the literati from the outside. He was a factory worker, you know, who worked across the country making mattresses for 20 years. So it's partly Al Purdy and his poetry, but it's partly what he represents, which is that he is such a romantic figure and deeply flawed, which is partly what makes him, I mean, if he was just like a hero, he'd be boring, you know. And I think for my generation, it's like we look back to a time that we've lost, and for Jake's generation, it's like, hey, we can make this happen now. Let's do that, you know.